Hey, how y'all doing? Welcome to Three Count Commentaries. This is your boy Mongo Slade, and today we're going to talk about Nail in the Coffin, the fall and rise of Vampiro documentary. This was actually very good. This is a lot different from the other documentaries I've been watching because this one has nothing to do with WWE. So, Vampiro, for people who don't know, was a superstar, huge superstar in AAA, and was a guy in WCW. I just say a guy because that's really all he was in WCW. So I'm familiar with Vampiro mostly from WCW, but I am becoming more of a fan of AAA, and for the last several years, I don't follow it religiously, but I have watched some of these events that took place here, and basically we talk about Vampiro, and this is a mixture of good old fashioned documentary, but it's also part of Undertaker: The Last Ride, where Vampiro is struggling to end his wrestling career on his own terms, but he's physically incapable of doing so. But this documentary is several years old, so let's get right into it. We learned that Ian Hodgkinson, which is Vampiro's real name, is was born in Canada. He debuted in the late '80s, early '90s. This week, what we get is Vampiro during production at Triple Mania. I believe it was Triple Mania 26. He was sitting back there in what they would call a gorilla position, directing the cameras, and he is very animated. so, uh, Hodgkinson or Vampiro was a big fan of punk rock. He was 20 years old and was forced to learn Spanish because he did not know any Spanish when he moved to Mexico. He became an icon in lucha libre. He never trained in pro wrestling, was only interested in rock music, and basically relied on his charisma and energy to get him over. And that he became very popular with women because of his look, and that the rock and roll rebellious type of image that he put out there, and that he became basically a huge heartthrob in AAA. So then we also did some background on AAA, that it was founded in 1992, and Vampiro was producing Triple Mania in the 25th anniversary. So it's basically 25 and 26 that was covered here. They did major media from ESPN, Sports Illustrated, and he talks about how pro wrestling started in Mexico. And then we get some background to El Santo, the biggest cultural icon in Mexico, and that pro wrestling is all about seeing your superheroes live and see superheroes seeing them live, and being able to actually touch your superheroes, and that superheroes fight for and stand for the common man. And there were some other people who were in this documentary who was like, hey, lucha libre is in the veins of the Mexican people, and that being Mexican is to struggle every day, and that wrestling is a metaphor for society. So then we get some really interesting stuff with him and his daughter. And his daughter becomes a more important part of the documentary later, but he basically calls her a lot. He's like a bugaboo. He calls her like all the time. And he was calling her while he was backstage at this show. And so basically we see that in 1989, he just walked up to Arena Mexico and talked to Paco Alonso and able to get booked in AAA. And that El Fantasma, who was the father of Santos Escobar in NXT, he actually took care of him, looked out for him, and that AAA is family. We see Chris DeJoseph is there. Chris DeJoseph was one of the producers for Lucha Underground. He's also a former WWF producer. I think he was the Big Dick Johnson guy. They used to come out in a thong and dance and stuff. And Vampiro then says like the best wrestling nowadays is behind the scenes because he's trying to put together everything. And then we get this chaotic scene. So we get a couple of chaotic scenes that took place at Triple Mania. One is Sexy Star breaking Rosemary's arm. This was crazy because we got to see Rosemary's broken arm. It was ugly. Basically, Vampiro was responsible for trying to figure out what happened in this situation, and that Sexy Star felt like she had been stiffed in this match with Rosemary. And so what she did was she cinched up on an arm bar and basically dislocated Rosemary's arm. And Rosemary was not happy. Her arm had a real unusual dangle to it. It was really fucked. And Vampiro was trying to figure out what would happen. Then later, it moved to drunk ass Jeff Jarrett. Oh my god, bro, it was such bullshit. Vampiro was sitting with John Morrison at Gorilla. They were talking and kind of going over some stuff that they were going to be doing, and then Jarrett showed up and started, just saying crazy shit to them. And they were kind of laughing at him at first, but then Jeff was supposed to go out, and I think they were doing like a Royal Rumble type of thing, and Jeff was supposed to go out, but he was not going. He was being very difficult. They couldn't get him to go and do his entrance because he was talking and walking around laughing and everything, and it was real pathetic. It was real pathetic. I was legit pissed at Jeff for this shit. So Vampiro blamed Jeff Jarrett for him never becoming a star in the United States by saying Jarrett didn't believe in him and that Jarrett ruined his career, and that Jeff Jarrett was the reason he quit the business until Lucha Underground, and now he's working with this guy in AAA, and he says basically, the biggest drug or the worst drug in wrestling is believing your own hype, and that's what Jarrett was. Jarrett was believing his own hype, and he was drunk and he was acting stupid. He was acting stupid when they finally pushed him out there, and then once he went out there, he was acting dumb, doing things he wasn't supposed to be doing, messing with the crowd and stuff like that, stuff that he wasn't supposed to be doing. And in the back, you see Jarrett is now angry, and he's trying to fight the boys, various wrestlers in the back. And we see Karrion Kross, who, his name is Kevin Cross. He was wrestling in AAA as Killer Kross. In WWE, he's Karrion Kross under the NXT banner, and he is, he's a massive dude. And he's waiting to tear into Jeff Jarrett because he thinks Jeff Jarrett's going to go after Vampiro. And Vampiro and Cross are really cool. So he's got a chair, and he's very serious about handling the Jeff Jarrett problem. He's very serious about handling the Jeff Jarrett problem. And Vampiro ended up telling him, look, everything is cool. I know you was ready to jump on him, but don't worry about it. So Vampiro and Morrison go back over their spots. Vampiro was actually correcting Morrison in Spanish. They were going through the choke slam that apparently Vampiro was going to choke slam Morrison. Vampiro said that, he's got all of these. He had a broken back, he had a broken neck, and that this show was making his body hurt because he got 86% of his body has chronic arthritis. But he's been working on this show for 9 months. He's going to get this shit right. And then he starts talking about his daughter. So basically says that everything goes secondary to his daughter. And that's when we got to sort of flashback to Canada, where he's originally from. So he's talking to his daughter, and he's talking about how much he hates wrestling. He says, I think he was talking to a doctor at this point. Because he says, he hates wrestling, but he wants to get away from it, but promoters keep booking him. The doctor asked him how many concussions he's had, and he says 24. He's had 24 concussions. And the doctor was like, okay, time to hang it up. It's over. Then we find out his daughter is a teenager. So, the excessive calling and everything wasn't to his daughter, but it was to his teenage daughter. She was 17 or something at this point. Now, I got confused a little bit because they kept doing, I thought he had 2 daughters, and I actually put that in my notes that he had 2 daughters. But it wasn't until later in the documentary I realized they were mixing home movies in with this. They were flashing back to when Dasha was a kid. And so I'm going to have to do my best to not say 2 daughters. He only has 1 daughter. But they had home movies from 2006 that was mixed in with this thing. So, and this thing was produced in 2017, 2018. So, him and Dasha live together. He has a horror themed home where he has all type of, cause he says that, a lot of the character and stuff like that is based on his love of horror movies. So that's kind of the theme in his house. And, his daughter basically talking about she didn't see him that much when he lived in Mexico, and that she didn't know he was a wrestler, but only that she only knew that he was famous. And that they didn't really have a chance to connect. And that moving to Canada was to help her finish high school. And that they're still trying to work things out because Vampiro's never lived with a woman. She's never really had a dad. So they're trying to figure out how to make this, work. and she was still a little standoffish. And then we really get into the meat of the documentary when she says, "Why do you go back to wrestling if you don't like it?" And so Vampiro said that his goal when he went into wrestling is that he wanted to be an icon. So we get a lot of talk about his backstage or why did he become a wrestler, and then we says that Vampiro came from a divorced home, that his mom and it was just him and his mom and his sister, and that he played hockey in 1979 and he was really getting pushed into hockey. And then he started getting into fights. He started having some trouble, as boys tend to do. He went to a Catholic high school and he didn't say he was sexually assaulted, but he basically said that there was some sexual assaults going on, and he didn't want to discuss it. And he said he didn't know how to discuss it. So he said he started doing drugs and to hide the pain and the pain and the shame that of his sexual assault. So he says when he was older, when he was young, he was introduced to the Sex Pistols by the band, the Sex Pistols, by an older guy, and that's what he wanted to be. Like he saw that, and that's the image he wanted for himself. And then he said he just happened to see the Road Warriors on AWA TV, which is Vern Gagne's TV, and that he wanted to be like them. And he said that the Road Warriors were like punk rock and sports put together. And he said Vampiro was born right there, and it was 1984. So 1984, he basically decided he wanted to be a pro wrestler. And then he says that, so he became like a really big wrestling fan. He says that in Montreal, there was the International Wrestling Alliance, and he wanted to go to the show, but his mom couldn't afford it. So he sold his hockey gear to go to the show. And he waited outside of the arena for 2 days and was begging to work on the ring crew. And while he was working on the ring crew, he trained at World's Gym. And that he said he knew that some wrestlers had come through there. But also what came through there was a guy named Robert Martin, who ended up being a bodyguard for Milli Vanilli. And the two of them became friends, and they became involved with drugs and gangs. And he talked about the Montreal Mafia, and that they really liked him because he never spoke or he never asked any questions. And he says him and Robert Martin used to go around robbing pimps and drug dealers and stuff like that. And then he says because he was doing stuff like that, being involved with the underworld of Montreal, he had to get the fuck out of the city. So he moved to LA. And he says that, everyone looked like a vampire in LA. So he said he was kind of lost. So he worked with Milli Vanilli. And he said that from Milli Vanilli, he learned about the fan-artist relationship and the machine that makes it all happen. So he said that he knew the guy who was extorting Milli Vanilli. That Milli Vanilli for a long time was being extorted. That there was people who knew that they were fake, and that they wanted cash in order to keep quiet. And so Milli Vanilli would steal from other rock stars, steal watches and different things like that to sell in order to pay this guy. And he said that obviously a lot of these rock stars would get high or get drunk, which would give Milli Vanilli the opportunity to steal from them. And he basically was like, these guys are basically like two gang members who came up with this brilliant idea to get over on the world by pretending that they were good singers. But then he says that he learned a lot from Milli Vanilli, not just because he learned how to interact with the crowds and different things like that, but he also stole their look. And he says, the early days of Vampiro was based on Milli Vanilli. And he showed pictures of him really with like a boy band look, with like the long braided hair, and he kind of looked kind of sissified and stuff like that. And he said he didn't call Mexico when he was done with the whole Milli Vanilli thing. He said he didn't really call. He just showed up at Arena Mexico unannounced. And he says back in the day, and somebody I think Paco Alonso's nephew was talking. He says back in the day, people would just wait for Paco Alonso outside the arena. That calling ahead or anything like that really didn't happen. He said that Paco Alonso took Vampiro's look. He liked his look, and he said that he thought he was interesting because he was interested in that he liked vampires, and he said he also liked the fact that Vampiro was Canadian, so he named him the Canadian Vampire, and he said that that ended up becoming an instant hit, and so. Vampiro was working 6 or 7 times a day for 7 days a week. And he said that the shows ranged from 4,000 people to 19,000 people per show. They were all over the country. He talked about it was a blur, and it sounds like it. It sounded really rough. He said that they were on no sleep. There was alcohol, drugs, girls all over the place. He said at 23, he felt like he was going to die in the ring. And he talked about how he busted his knee taking a moonsault from the top rope, and that after he told the promoters and everyone, the people in the locker room, hey, my knee is messed up. They said, so what? You got 3 more shows to do today. And so they were like, look, there was 40,000 tickets sold. You have to be at these shows. So he said, despite the fact that his knee was swollen up and everything, they just they hired a veterinarian to drain his knee and numb it so that he could perform the last 3 shows of the day. And basically, he just says that in order to make it, these guys started doing what they call the Highway to Puebla, which is they stacked tables from end to end and just did lines of coke off the tables. And he said he would do an ounce of coke by himself every weekend. And says it's basically like it was free drugs, and there was sleeping pills and pain pills all the time. And he talked about it like said it was bad, but it was fun, And it was weird that he would say it like that, but he did. And then he says that, it was a terrible cycle of drugs and depression and loneliness. It was all just, and this was the early days of AAA. So then we started talking about Conan. And Conan had a freaking lion, a pet lion. He had horses and stuff. And Vampiro was like, when I came to Mexico, Conan was the guy. Conan was the Hulk Hogan of Mexico. And then he says, but then when he started coming in, he became almost as popular as Conan, but he didn't have the abilities of Conan. So Conan was a better worker than he was, but he was more over because he was a sex symbol, and he was more charismatic. And he says he felt like Conan was jealous of him. It was jealous of his meteoric rise through Mexico, and he felt like people were trying to pit him and Conan against each other. And he says that he didn't like Conan, and Conan hated him. And then he says that Conan was one of the guys that, ruined his run in WCW by saying that, Conan was in WCW before he got there. And that when Conan found out he was coming in, that he would tell different guys like Luger and Hall and Nash that not to sell for him, not to do much, not to work with him and stuff like that. And that kind of impeded his run in WCW. But he said he still managed to work with Flair and Hogan. And, he started talking about the thing where he wanted to take it to the next level, and he wanted to really break out and do something different. So he said he went to a Misfits concert, and he said that the idea of the Misfits with Vampiro really resonated with him, because he says that, the Vampiro character is for the kid who gets picked on, the kid who skateboards and isn't the most popular kid. And that's what the Vampiro character was supposed to resonate with. That was the idea behind Vampiro and the Misfits. But he said like the older guys didn't really get it. And he says that, Vince Russo, for all the flack that he gets, like the number one problem with Vince Russo is that he showed favoritism towards Jeff Jarrett. And then Jarrett, who was in the documentary, not just as he was acting a fool backstage at Triple Mania, but actually was talking, was interviewed. Jarrett was talking about the similarities between Vampiro and Sting, and that Vampiro came out and people didn't know the difference between Vampiro and Sting. A lot of people thought that Vampiro was biting Sting, that basically Vampiro was a knockoff of Sting, or that he was Sting's tag team partner, or that he had some type of association with Sting. And he says like, look, it's not like the world is today. He's like, and today, people would have just Googled Vampiro and would have known he's a completely different person. But back in 1999, 2000, 2001, whatever this was, people just saw him as a Sting-associated kind of person. And that didn't sit well with a lot of people. And yet, then they show some clips of Vampiro talking, and he says how WCW ruined 3 years of his life, and that, fuck WCW. And that he broke his neck on a Mike Awesome powerbomb from the top rope. And that he said when he broke his neck, he had a 3-year, $6 million contract. And he says he walked away from it, and he wanted to go to Japan. And he was offered a 9-year, $600,000 a year contract. And he turned it down because it was 30 weeks a year, and he would have to be away from his daughter. And he says that he left the business because he couldn't stay away from his daughter that long. Now, he was married during his height of Vampiro, when he was Vampiro in WCW, I believe. He had gotten married, and he says that, his wife left him because he was away for so long, and that he was real bitter because he felt like the wrestling business had used him and discarded him. But he only really, that's why he hates wrestling, because he felt like the wrestling business had used him and discarded him, and it had really not treated him fairly and not treated him right. So he says he really does everything for his daughter now, and that he didn't want to be a dad that was out on the road all the time, and he hates that he has to use Vampiro to make a living, but he wants to leave the business on a high note. And he says he talked about how much he hates people and he hates being famous. This is another thing that he talked about a lot in his documentary, is how much he hates being famous. That the fame that Vampiro created is inescapable, especially in Mexico. He just can't get away from it. That's why he moved to Canada. Then we get Killer Kross. He basically talks about Vampiro takes on too much, and he says that when he does, he divides his energy and it makes him crazy. So, which is got to be true for most people who end up doing that type of stuff. He says that Vampiro talked about like he's been driven crazy by his inability to say goodbye to wrestling in the way that he wanted. So he moved to Canada to escape Vampiro, because he didn't. He was tired of people coming up to him wanting to sign autographs, and it was too much. So he moved away, and he says that they didn't really know it at the time, but Dasha said she wouldn't have made it, which is his daughter. She wouldn't have made it if they hadn't moved to Canada, because she said she was getting bullied a lot in Mexico, and she really didn't know how she would finish school, or she would even try to finish school, because it was so bad for her. And she said so they moved to Thunder Bay, where Vampiro opened a Krav Maga academy, and then introduced the concept of the Guardian Angels. He introduced the Guardian Angels to Thunder Bay, Canada, and to Mexico City, because he said he wanted to give back to his communities. So the Guardian Angels, for people who don't know, is a volunteer organization that these people with the red berets, they walk around, and they're basically like neighborhood watch. They're not allowed to carry weapons, but they are trained in martial arts and stuff like that, basically conflict resolution and different things like that. They don't really have them a lot in the United States anymore. They kind of died down, but Vampiro says he saw it in the 80s, and he thought it was really useful, so he wanted to bring those concepts to Mexico City and bring it to Canada, and so he did. So then he says that Lucha Underground was very interesting to him because it was an opportunity to bring Mexican culture to the United States. And the executive producers of Lucha Underground were Robert Rodriguez, who was a director, and Mark Burnett, who created Survivor. And he basically talked about how much he liked Matt Striker, and then he says that Vampiro says he joined Lucha Underground to be a color commentator, but he says that he started finding that there were holes in the story. So he says that, there was nobody to get in the gutter, to get their hands dirty. There was no agents. There was nobody to coordinate the cameras. And then also he decided to get back in the ring. And somebody said something like he always wonders, he's always concerned about Vampiro getting back in the ring because he does so many other jobs that it would really make their jobs hard if he had gotten hurt. But Vampiro loved Lucha Underground. That was his baby. And then they flipped to a show. I forget which show it was, but this is where Kevin Kross basically said Vampiro comes up to him and says that he wants to take the Doomsday Saito, his suplex finish. And Kross told him like, "Hey, look, this is unnecessary. You don't have to do this." And Vampiro insisted doing it. And when it happened, Vampiro got hurt. So. And he said he felt really bad because he should have stuck to his guns and, not did it. But Vampiro really, really wanted to do it. So this is where we get that Vampiro hates being a luchador. He hates being a celebrity. And this is where you get why luchadors wear masks. That's really why luchadors wear masks. Because they become so popular in Mexico that you can't go anywhere and you can't do anything. Since Vampiro never wore a mask, he is recognized everywhere he goes, especially during the early days where he didn't even paint his face. He just wore like heavy makeup. like a lipstick and eyeshadow and stuff like that during his Milli Vanilli days before he started painting his face. And so he's recognized everywhere he goes. So there's like home movies of people walking up to him with their kids, while he's out with his daughter at the playground, and they're asking him to sign autographs, and he had like a real horrible attitude about it, but he would do it, and he'd talk about them behind their back, like, I fucking hate people, I fucking hate them, I hate them. And like they were walking up to him while he was with his daughter having ice cream. It was crazy. People were yelling at him like Vampiro, Vampiro, and like waving at him, wanting him to sign stuff. It was so bad. It was so bad. And so then Dasha asked him, why does he keep wrestling if he hurts all the time? If he always hurts, why would he keep doing it? And then Vampiro says that I do it every time to see if I can still do it one last time. And this is where we get into the whole idea of kind of like the last ride for the Undertaker. Like he wants to end his career on his terms. Dasha was really sad. Like the pain was so bad that she was talking about how sometimes he would be immobile. He couldn't move. And Vampiro would say like, look, every time he goes out there, he's embarrassing himself. He said he's making a fool out of himself because his heart isn't in it anymore. He doesn't want to wrestle anymore. He loves producing. He loves, being a director. He doesn't want to be Vampiro anymore. But he keeps doing it because he wants to see if he can do it one last time. He's basically addicted to it. And it's very, very difficult to see because, you believe it when he says it and he's walking with a limp and he can't really walk up or down stairs. It is really crazy. Like it got to the point also where Dasha was driving because he couldn't drive, so it was really bad. And then near the end of the film, we get where Dasha is graduating high school. And throughout the story, we kept getting that, obviously she was growing up because you see the home movies and she's about 5 or 6 or something like that around that time. And now you get interspersed with her being a teenager when she's like 17 or 18. And she's starting to change, you see through the phone calls that, she's getting a little bit more annoyed with all of the calling. And he's like, he basically can't let her go, because she has become his entire world. He can't let her go. So now that she's graduated from high school, he's going to have to let her go because she's got to go off to college and everything. And he says that as annoying as he is, that, all of the excessive calling, all of the excessive, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you have money? Do you have this? Because he travels so much. Even though he doesn't wrestle, he travels to do different things all the time. That he was excessively calling her and worrying about her. And he said, like, it's not always for you. Sometimes it's just for me. Sometimes I need to know that you're okay, or I need to tell you that I'm okay. And she would just kind of be like, okay, sure, whatever. But this particular scene of her graduating high school was really emotional because he says like he didn't know if he was crying because he was happy she was graduating or sad because he knows that now she's going to be independent of him, that he's about to lose her. And he was like really like crushed about this. And the mom of Dasha didn't show up until near the end of the documentary. She didn't say anything. She wasn't interviewed. It wasn't his wife, I could say that much. She was basically like I think a woman he met in Mexico. But she was there at the end. So the end of the documentary shows Vampiro producing Triple Mania 26, it's in 2018. And basically he says that you can't be an agent or a producer or a director if you weren't a wrestler because you wouldn't get it. And that, he says that the crazy thing about wrestling, it has a great plan for entry, but it has a shitty exit strategy. So he says that, there's not much you can do once you're done with wrestling. And then it shows that he did this scene with Conan in the middle of the ring during Triple Mania 26 of him, him and Conan saying they're going to have a match. And if Conan loses, he has to leave AAA forever. Him and Conan apparently had a match at Triple Mania 27. I don't remember that. But at the end of the documentary, it shows that, Dasha went off to college and everything. And that Vampiro now has early stage Alzheimer's. And that he's, still occasionally getting in the ring. So it was really emotional. You know, as a guy who was only mildly a fan of Vampiro, I became more of a fan of Vampiro. Like, I didn't watch WCW in 1999, 2000, or whatever. I was almost out of wrestling completely around that time. But this was very informative. It was very informative because this guy was a huge star, and you know he's like struggling with his own fame, and he feels trapped in it. And the wrestling business is so addictive that he's just keeps going back to it, and he doesn't really have much of anything else. You know, the only thing he really has other than wrestling is his daughter, and he's about to lose his daughter to adulthood. So he's kind of leaning back into wrestling, which is crazy. And then also Lucha Underground officially closed in 2020. So about a year and a half after this documentary aired, uh, Lucha Underground was officially canceled. Actually, it pretty much had been canceled already, but the network went out of business in 2020. So it was he really all he got is AAA, you know, and I really feel bad for him because he did work that deathmatch style where it was glass and you know thumbtacks and light tubes and all that shit. That was really Vampiro's thing, and you know look at what he did to his body. And he's 50 now. He's probably 52 or 53 now that he's you know it's 2021. So you're talking about a guy who really gave it all to the business, and you know at 23 he felt like he was not going to be able to go anymore because he was you know running his body ragged, working 5 or 6 times a day, and you know it was really sad, but it was also very emotional and very touching. But you can see that Vampiro is his own worst enemy because he can't walk away from it. He can't get away. He can't just be happy producing and directing, which is what he loves to do. But he feels like he has to keep getting in the ring. And I'm pretty sure if Conan was to do a documentary, it'd probably be the same thing because Conan shouldn't be wrestling either. You know, Conan nearly died a few years ago, so this was very good. If you are a fan of wrestling in general, this is great. If you're not a fan of Vampiro, this will you know still be sympathetic. It probably wouldn't make you a fan, obviously, but this would show you that you know there's far more to him than fluorescent light tubes and all the blood and gut shit that he did in Mexico and in Puerto Rico and stuff like that. That he was really a real how he was as a person, and that what he's struggling with. So this was really good. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Use the hashtag 3Count Commentaries to support the channel 3Count Commentaries. If you want to send me some money, please do. I would appreciate that. And I'll talk to you guys later.
Da 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 da.